Hello and welcome back to Finding Mojo. I'm your host Pete Ball, and today I'm going to read to you the first chapter of my most recent novel, Deathless. Once again, it's a historical novel set in the 1980s in the country of Nepal, and about a journalist trekking through the Himalayas in search of the deathless yogis. Chapter 1. December 1985, Kathmandu, Nepal. Standing outside the airport, the dust and the sickly smell of diesel fumes made Lance feel a little queasy. A confusion of people, cars and animals crowded the street before him, and someone was pulling at his backpack strap. "Carry bag, sir. Where to, sir?" A skinny older man, wearing threadbare clothes and a multicoloured Nehru cap, smiled toothlessly at him. "No thanks," Lance replied, politely. But the man insisted. "Bugger off, okay? Comprende?" Jono intervened, adding, "You've got to be firm with these people, man." Lance ignored his friend and opened his copy of the Lonely Planet Guide to Nepal. He'd already marked the page ahead of time and found the address of the backpacker accommodation that they'd chosen. "Come on, let's get a taxi," he said, closing the book on his finger and waving down a dusty, battered Datsun 1600. Leaning his head close to the window and pointing to the address in the guidebook, he said the name of the street, and the middle-aged Nepali driver nodded confidently and indicated they should put their bags in the back of the car. Lance glanced around before climbing into the front seat. Feeling faintly ridiculous, dressed in his InXS t-shirt, skinny jeans and Adidas joggers, everyone around him was wearing traditional dress, and he felt aware of the stark contrast of his privileged life in Sydney and their struggle to survive, and he involuntarily blushed. Once seated in the car, he opened the window, as the driver had apparently not washed in a while, and Jono tapped him from the back seat, pointing at the dash. "No meter," he said. Lance opened the guidebook, flicked through to the page he wanted, and asked in a broad Australian accent, "Yokati cha? How much is the fare?" "No problem. I do special price for you," the driver replied, with a grin. "We need to know how much first, man. Remember it said that in the guide," Jono reminded him from the back seat. "Stop the car," Lance said. The driver did not stop, however, indicating there was nowhere he could pull over. "Yokati cha," Lance repeated. "How much for the taxi to this place?" "Tell me now, or we're getting out," Lance said, an assertive edge to his tone. The driver smiled, threw up his hands and replied, 200 rupees. Special price for you today, sir." 100, Jono interjected, cutting Lance off before he could agree. "I have many children to feed, sir. I have many babies. I am a poor man. Taxi driver not rich in this country, sir," he pleaded. 150 rupees, Lance counted. 160, please, good sir. Then I will feed my babies," the driver replied, his hands off the wheel, gesturing. He was able to both drive and negotiate at the same time, Lance thought with a smile. Jono was about to object when Lance replied, "Okay, 160 rupees. The driver smiled and relaxed. Jono scowled. "You know we paid too much, right?" 60 rupees more, man. How much is that again in Aussie dollars? 20 cents? Come on, don't be a tight ass. Jono folded his arms and glared out the window, shaking his head. "American?" the driver asked, as he negotiated a cow in the middle of the intersection. Lance laughed and, grabbing a red Konica pop camera from his waist pouch, quickly snapped a pic. "Nah, Australian, mate," he replied, brushing his long back fringe from his eyes. His hairstyle was inspired by Robert Smith from The Cure, while Jono was more of a Duran Duran copycat, with his streaked blonde hairstyle. Both wore identical Ray-Ban Wayfarers, which cost as much as the local people probably made in a year, Lance pondered soberly. "Are you trekking?" "My cousin is a guide." "A very good guide, sir," the driver suggested. "Nah, journalist, mate. We're here to make a documentary," Jono replied slowly and loudly, as if that would help the Nepali understand him better. The driver just nodded and tooted the car horn again, which seemed an essential accessory in negotiating the busy Kathmandu streets. "Wow, check that out, man," Jono called from the back seat, as an elephant in full parade regalia was being marshalled in a side street. Lance whipped out the Konica again and snapped off a shot. "Stinks here, hey?" Jono noted, holding his nose closed with two fingers. Lance turned around and laughed. "Welcome to Kathmandu, man." Wanting to convey the sense of smell to his audience in the opening scene of his documentary, Lance tried to identify all the separate smells that contributed to the overall effect. There was the unmistakable overarching cloud of exhaust fumes, blended with the thick, sweet odour of animal dung. He noted the raw goat's body parts for sale in an open-air butcher as flies buzzed around with impunity. "We should have got the camera out, you know, the small one. We could be filming this for the intro, man. Kicking myself," Lance said, leaning back over the seat. "Yeah, nah, it's cool. We could set that shot up later after we settle. Chill, man." Jono replied in his usual relaxed manner. Lance was glad that his colleague from his last job was able to join him on this first freelance mission. They'd worked together previously on the Willesee show until he got the sack for being a little too outspoken with the director. Lance liked to think of himself as an investigative journalist. This was to be his first experience working freelance, and Jono had taken leave from the show to come along as his cameraman. As Lance studied his surroundings, he was impressed by how alien everything was. It felt as if he'd travelled back in time to some ancient land. However, this was the capital city of the Kingdom of Nepal. Even that gave it a surreal quality. It was his first time in a kingdom, which made it sound like something from a fairy tale. The place certainly looked surreal enough to be in a fairy story. Kathmandu was also the gateway to the Himalayas, which they'd witnessed from the air as they flew in a short time ago. He pondered their majesty now as he gazed through the dirty windscreen at the dusty streets and ageing buildings, a stark contrast to the purity of the snow-white Himalaya. He longed to feel the freedom of walking among their peaks, breathing in the chill, clean air and seeking the story of a lifetime. If he got this right, it could be the start of his new career, he believed. The driver suddenly pulled over after allowing a horse and cart to pass. "Your destiny," he announced somewhat eerily, Lance thought, despite obviously being his misuse of English. "Dhanyabad," Lance replied awkwardly, attempting to pronounce the unfamiliar word in English. "Thanks." "I can help with any things you need. I have many cousins who know many people. I'll visit tomorrow. I can help with any things," the driver cried before leaving in a cloud of smoke. Lance waved farewell, then turned to look at the ramshackle building before them and sighed with disappointment. It was a dump. He cast a meaningful glance at Jono, who grimaced painfully. "And so," Lance said with a grin, "the adventure begins." End of chapter 1. If you'd like to read the rest of the story, I'll put the link to the Amazon shop below. If you're a Prime member, I believe you can read it for free. Take care. Have a nice day.